Anytime somebody asks me to like do a workshop or a training around HIV, they always want me to talk about the bad things. Like, tell me about the medication and tell me about how people are going to get sick. When we're literally, I say, I can talk about how people are living and thriving with HIV. Like, I can do that.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Positive Voices. I'm your host, Leah Henry.
And I'm Malachi Stewart. My pronoun preferences are he, him, his. And we are here with Dr. Shanéa Thomas. Dr. Shanéa, introduce yourself. Tell us your pronoun preferences.
Sure. My pronouns are he and she. I don't use they. And if all else fails, Dr. Thomas is perfectly fine.
Awesome.
Perfect. I'm really excited to have this conversation today because I think, we're in this kind of resurgence of mental health, right? When we're discussing, in communities of color, mental health, the conversation is expanding. And I think it's super important for this podcast when we're talking about positive voices and we're talking about the things that the community needs in a positive space. Mental health and HIV, I think, go hand in hand. So thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about conversation today.
So with that said, Dr. Thomas, tell us a little bit about what you do. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I do a little bit of everything. So I'm originally from Hampton, Virginia. Okay. I came here around 2000 to do some work. I wanted to be a social worker. So I went to Howard University.
HU, come on.
Yes.
We love to see it.
School of Social Work. And from there, that kind of like catapulted my ability to be able to work in different spaces. Schools were really important, particularly in the work that I do, working in special ed or accessibility services. And then once I was kind of doing this work in schools for a while, I really wanted to move into sexual health, working around, educating around human sexuality. More so that came from working with teachers and teacher assistants and administrators who we were having this, in my day, this resurgence of like queer kids coming out and being out and nobody knew what to do. And I think honestly, in the intersection of that, I was also coming out too. So I was just like, well, how do I also learn to give a proper service and get proper service? How can I do those things at once? So I went back to school, went to Widener University for my degree in human sexuality studies and education. Now I have a doctorate degree in organizational change and leadership. I've been here in the DC area since 2006. So it's nice to be able to have a home to where this work can grow. I'm very proud to say that I'm at University of Maryland right now, where I'm their LGBTQ training specialist and assistant clinical professor. And really my job is to take these wonderful products that University of Maryland Prevention Research Center created and really instill it into the community for mental health professionals to be a little bit more competent around LGBTQ work. So that's been great. I have a private practice. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, so I do the actual work. On top of I work with organizations, institutions, different schools and universities around helping them build particularly DEI initiatives. So a lot of times when we think about DEI, we think about like race and we kind of stop there. But nobody necessarily thinks about how gender plays a part in the way that we treat people, how sex plays a part in the way that we treat people, especially when we're talking about social workers, human service providers. So my goal is just to be a social worker among social workers and to kind of help people be a little bit more competent so we can all give really good care.
Absolutely. And it sounds like a lot of the work, or a lot of what fueled your work, was sort of providing or being in spaces which you would have needed in that moment. And as Leah said, we're in a time where like it has never been more acceptable, particularly as Black people, to go to engage in therapy services. For somebody who's watching, who's still on the fence, who's still like, is therapy for me? Is mental health services for me? How do I engage that? What would your professional response be for that?
Ooh, see, professional and personal would be different.
So wait. I'm here for the personal too.
So first of all, I would say professional. Yes, right? There is mental health services that are for everybody. You may like CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. You may like DBT. You may like EMDR, right? There's all these different types of therapy that people can engage in. Yes, I think there's all types of ways that people can have access to those services. We are growing now to where we're moving to telehealth. So there are plenty of telehealth services. You also have like particular organizations that also specialize in certain populations. So you have have therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men. My friend Erica Woodland created the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network. So there's literally a directory of trans and queer therapists of color who are actually giving services, right? So yes, I think all of that is really accessible to people in some ways, right? And then I think my professional opinion is not for everybody. Right? Sitting down and actually talking to somebody is not always a proper way to be able to give mental health services. You know, even thinking if we're going to move and talk about accessibility services and talk about neurodivergent people, when we are talking to certain folks, like talking doesn't get it, but thinking about art therapy, thinking about community groups, thinking about, you know, how can we get you connected to a community that like has parties or has like, you know, sipping paints, or how do we get you instilled in a community to be able to support you. And that's the type, when I'm in therapy, you know, even when I'm working with my clients, my skill is always, let's talk about who we can connect you to, because I'm not always going to be there forever. Right. You know, in therapy, I want to be able to help you instill yourself to be able to take care of yourself in some way, shape, or form. And a part of doing that is community healing. So twofold, right? So like, yes. And I think there are other ways outside of sitting on a couch and talking to somebody that actually provides a certain level of healing for folks.
Well, and I think that's like an important part. You talked about community, and when we're talking about HIV and diagnosis, we know that there's a stigma attached. We know that, honestly, a lot of people who are diagnosed with HIV don't want to share with their community due to, you know, a plethora of reasons. So talk about, you know, in some of the work that you've done, you know, in your space with HIV, how that stigma can affect people not wanting to be a part of community during that time.
Absolutely. I will say that I didn't come into LGBTQ work doing HIV work. That actually work came before getting into doing like LGBTQ training. When I worked at schools, particularly when I worked at a high school, I think that was my first like interaction with kids who were living with HIV. And I was just like, okay, don't know a lot, right? I come from the generation of like, I learned about HIV from Magic Johnson. But I remember back in the day on BET, I'm watching videos and then there's like a breaking news and it's like Magic Johnson has HIV and I don't know what that means, right? I'm a young kid. I'm like 10, 12 at the time, and living in the South, you know, particularly having parents from the deep South, there are also stigmas that I just was taught back in the day. So now that I'm an adult, I'm in a position of power when I'm teaching and educating and doing social work, and I have a kid that comes to me and is just like, you know, I just found out that I'm HIV positive. What do I do? I have to check a lot of my own stuff, right? There was stuff that I was coming in with that I really had to think about and work through myself. And so I think that, you know, one thing that I have seen, especially in working with other clients, is that yes, as much as I connect people to community, that's the important thing, right? Finding other people who are like you, finding other people doing, you know, working through the same issues. The struggle is what happens when you leave that community. That's where the work gets hard, because they don't want to tell their friends. They don't want to tell their partners. They don't want to talk to their kids about it. You know, even now, you know, when I'm hearing people who are just, you know, we have wonderful things such as pep and prep, and I'm having conversations with them. Even when I'm sitting in a classroom, realizing that for me, I'm a professional gay, right? So it's just like, I'm gay, literally, for like, that's part of my job. But when I get into a classroom and talk about pep and prep, a lot of my heterosexual students have no idea what that is. And these are the next level of social workers and human service providers. So I think, for one, in order to help combat some of the stigma, is just really kind of educating ourselves very early, no matter what profession we are in. We're always going to interact with someone. You just never know, right? You just never know. And then for two, I think it's really kind of continuing to instill this really strong community within oneself, right? Being able to find places where you can go to get respected. Being able to find also positive images in the media. I feel like that's something that I also have to battle up against. It doesn't matter how much I talk to a client. If you are watching a Tyler Perry film. Sorry if y'all are famous. But if you're watching a Tyler Perry film and you see that, oh my gosh, once I get HIV, like I'm gonna be decrepit and nobody's gonna want me. Like you come to therapy, I can create a safe space for you. But once you leave here, like what does that look like?
What do you consume?
What do you consume, right? Like that affects your mental health. And I think that goes back to when we think about particularly science and research around minority stress theory. It's not only about what happens when I leave a particular place, it's also what I'm internalizing. What am I watching on TV? How are my friends talking about me? I had one client who didn't even want to tell her family because she saw how another uncle was being treated and how he was given like paper plates and like paper napkins and everybody else was given like, ceramic ware and glassware because they were fearful of just like having these old stigmas, like passing it on in certain ways that just don't exist, right? Without some level of education. So I think it's hard. Like, I think it's hard to be able to maintain a safe space within yourself and community. And then the lack of safety of what happens when you leave that is really difficult for folks.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have a question for both Shanéa and Dr. Thomas. I'm interested in
Right,
okay. We're interviewing two people.
Okay.
Right, okay. Live for that.
As you know some of my story. I was diagnosed in 2008. It was not a time where mental health services were being heralded. It was a whole different time, actually, and we both worked in some clinical settings together. So we know, red carpet services, things like, you test positive and we elevate you to the next level. None of that existed. Yeah. I literally found that I was positive in the hallway. Provider saw me in the hallway, told me I was positive. That was it. No one connected me to Ryan White services. I didn't know that there was connections to pay for my medication. Like that was a different time. And because I was dealing with the stigma and my own internalized stigma, I was dealing with this was a traumatic event to hear that. And as black men who have sex with men, as a queer Black man, in some ways it's something that we always know is in a realm of possibility. There's a part of you that's always expecting it. But when it happened, it was so traumatic that I felt like I was stunned. And I remember taking the first, at the time, there was only one pill a day regimen. I'll just say that. And it did not work well for me. It's one of the medicines that either work really good for you or it doesn't. And my experience no one prepared me for it. And I'm saying all that to say that I was going through so much changes mentally. My mind, taking medication, feeling like I'm sick on it. I'm I'm gonna die. Because I saw movies like Philadelphia. Yeah. I saw, these are my references. Yeah. And with no one to step in, I'm saying that in juxtaposition to having worked with you professionally. And I know how many clients I have been I'm going to go ahead and forward this telephone encounter to Dr. Thomas and let them follow up with you. And I've watched your support change people's adherence to their medication. I've watched your support. There's so many people, so many patients that we've shared who have been diagnosed since the 80s. Cis Black women, queer Black men, trans women who had never experienced what it was to be undetectable. And now they had this experience. And I know so much of that was the mental health piece. It was finally somebody here to just talk about, to unpack the emotions. When you talked about that paper plate, I have had cis hetero women tell me I came to the cookout and I made the macaroni salad and nobody ate. And they wouldn't eat for my children. And now I don't go to events and now I don't go outside. Yeah. I've had patients, just develop all types of phobias around going even out the house because of how important have you found in your work is providing these mental health services to HIV positive patients when it comes to their adherence, when it comes to keeping them retained in care. What is your experience been with that?
So important, right? Having the space, that's makes me so happy that people are, that people feel that way. I think it's not only Dr. Thomas, Shanéa, right? Yes, mental health services are important in order for people to feel great. I think the type of mental health services is the difference, right? Because when people come to me, I'm not saying you got HIV, you got to take your medicine. Let's talk about why you're not adhering, right? Let's talk about okay, we can't do all of the medication then. Let's talk about one pill, right? Let's make a schedule for you. Yes. I understand it's hard. I know every time you take it, it reminds you of this one night or this incident or this person, right? I know these things, right? It's being able to sit literally where the client is, which I think makes the difference in being able to have some level of adherence. And as a person who is HIV negative, I think I had to check myself around how, in the clinical sense, yes, I want to make my patient take their medication and for them to be adherent. And once I say, you know why you have to take it, right? But it's just like, I have to understand that if something I'm taking is literally reminding me of a not so great time or reminding me of just like being told in a hallway, right? If I am able to sit with that person and say like, I understand why this is hard. That sucks.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry that happened to you. How can we both empower ourselves in this moment in order to move forward? Okay, we're not taking our medication today. Cool. We know we got to take it, right? So when are we going to decide to take it, right? So I think being able to put the power back into the person and to be able to have some level of just like, I want to take this back from the experience that I have, and not to color that all experiences around being told are bad, right? Like I also don't want to say that, but also it doesn't help when you have a community or you live in a society that is phobic, right? Like doesn't help. So I think, yes, mental health services is very important. I think having providers that are particularly trained and competent and sensitive and compassionate, it makes the difference because you can have a mental health provider and they be crappy.
Yeah.
See, I corrected myself.
See, there you go. Yeah, you did well. No, but I want to circle back because I think there's something really important in what you said, because I don't think I even thought about it like that. Of course, I've never experienced that as a negative person, but the trauma within the diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? And Malachi, you as well, because I think the moment you said taking a pill reminds you of a moment, and that's super deep. I'm sitting on the couch kind of stunned at the idea of the trauma that you kind of relive in the sense of like taking care of yourself. So talk to me about, just your experience with having patients or having people that you treat where it is so much trauma attached to a diagnosis and how people are able to move forward. Because I know there's somebody's listening right now who can relate to taking a pill and remembering a night, right? Yeah. Remembering a day that changed their entire life and how they navigate their lives. So talk to me more about that, because that's a really interesting thing.
Sure. Yeah. It just really changes the trajectory of how you think about yourself and your health, right? Again, apart from what we are being told in society, what's being taught in schools, what's being taught in your health classroom, like there's no space that I know of in a random classroom where people are just like, it's great. Right? Like anytime somebody asks me to like do a workshop or a training around HIV, they always want me to talk about the bad things. Like tell me about the medication and tell me about how people are going to get sick. When we're literally, I say, I can talk about how people are living and thriving with HIV. Like I can do that. And I think my lessons around trauma, especially around like medication management and adherence, came from kids. Shout out to kids. Like shout out to kids. Like kids taught me about like, no, I actually don't want to do this because I didn't do this to myself. They're very honest.
They're honest.
I'm not taking this. I didn't do this, right? I got it. I was born this way. Yes. Or something else happened. I didn't do this. So I'm not doing that. You can't make me. So that was really my push of being able to figure out how do I help you regain a sense of power around your medication, right? Maybe it's not about the pill. Maybe it's about your health, right? How do we want to be healthy? How do we want to think, and a lot of these kids that I have, like they're in relationships. Like they out here and they're having sex, right? As kids, as people who are educated around their bodies and have body autonomies absolutely should, right? I'm going to have the same conversation with you that I have with any other 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old, right? Yeah. No matter what your status is. I'm going to talk about taking care of yourself. I'm going to talk about barriers. I'm going to talk about the health of the other person. We're going to have healthy conversations. Like that part does not change for me. Yeah. But I think the thing that I had to, again, realize is that I had to meet people where they're at. It's hard to even take a birth control pill every day. Right?
Talk to the girls out here now.
Like, first of all, it's even hard to do that, but to take something that literally sometimes makes you sick, right? Sometimes doesn't feel well, that you have to literally stop in your day for 2.5 seconds to think about this one moment. Like I had to realize for me as a person who doesn't have to do that, how hard and difficult that is, and sit in them with it. So
yeah. And I of course don't represent a collective, right? Yeah. But I do represent a lot of people, and I saw it in a lot of clients. Stigma says it's your fault. And so if I am taught that I got this because of something I did and I'm wrong, am I even forgiving myself enough to deserve what undetectable means. That's what people don't realize.
We're not even there.
It's going through. And when you don't have an outlet for the conversation, you know, when I became positive, we were calling it the monster. That was the nickname for it in the community. And I remember telling a friend, and he was like, and meant this like with full empathy, like, you got the monster? But you got to think about the words, the monster, like the fact that it's being connotated, like that's the connotations around it, right? Like, what does that make you feel about this thing that really, you just had sex, honey. You didn't do nothing that, like, I had sex, unprotected, the same way all of our parents did, because that's why we sitting here. So, like, you know, that, but you're taught that your sex means something different. So what does it mean for not only like my deserving of this medication and this treatment and what it provides for, but what does it mean for my community deserving that? Because I didn't know cis het people who had it until I started working in the field. And I would say how I know that carried into my work. And I remember this kind of being a funny thing at first, because I was calling patients sometimes just to say, you know, remind them of an appointment. But I would always, because I'm positive, I would always just say, like, how are you doing? How's your day? How's your, and patients would go into full crisis. They would go into full crisis, like, and I'm like, I just said, good morning, how you doing? Because people are so used to treating people in a sterile way. And when you know that you might be the only person that's calling this person and ever saying, like, how are you?
Right.
How's the last 2 weeks been? And like, people are really able to share with you in a way, because nobody's asked that before. And I'm saying that to stamp the work. I'm saying that to stamp that mental health on whatever level that you engage it is so important, because people would expect you to seroconvert, to become positive, and to just snap into this regime of, like, I'm a machine that's going to take this medication. No, I need, like, emotional support. I need, like, an outlet. My spirit needs to be made right. I need to be affirmed. I need to know that my worthiness has not changed. And if you're not speaking to that, a person is sort of left in a space of, like, you know, what do I do? So I think that's definitely important to really stamp the work.
Yeah, and I will say also to that, like, you know, a part of being able to do that level of check-in is having a sense of empathy, right? Like, I know where you are. I understand.
Absolutely.
I think for me, something that I had to check due to all of my places where I've got my information on HIV, I had to check simple things like body language. I had to think of how I talk to people. When my kids would come into my room, like, I had to, like, I remember doing this, like, at first, and I had to check myself. Again, when you don't have the education, when you are not knowledgeable, like, subconsciously, you can really, like, spread ignorance. And because of the level of heightened stigma, you know when that happens, right? You see those things happen to other people. So just, like, I would start having lunches with them, right? When they would come in the hallway and they'd be like, hey, Miss Thomas, like, you know, I'm gonna shake your hand. I'm gonna touch you. Like, we're gonna actually be close to each other. When I have my client, you know, when I have my adult clients, like, we're gonna talk about intimacy. We're not gonna move away from any of these subjects because you're positive. Like, you still need to be touched and loved and have compassion just like everybody else. So, you know, again, it goes back to mental health piece, where it's just like, it's not just how much you know and if you have a degree in this and if you went to a training or two. It's literally doing the internal work of undoing all of that stuff that you have learned from your parents, from your parents' parents, from what you saw on TV, from the movies that you watch. Like, it's really important to do some of that work too.
And I think one of the things that is important that you said is about kind of what you consume, because we're talking about the media, right? As somebody who's a media personality, when people talk about the big bad media, right? Like, I think that everyone kind of assumes that there's this, like, agenda, but the reality is I think it's also a part of the consumption, right? Because, you know, like you said, 20 years ago, HIV was the monster, right? Even shortly as 10 years ago, right? But as we're moving now, I don't think there's necessarily a negative connotation, but I don't think there's a positive one either, right? So now it's like, okay, we won't make it so negative, right? But we aren't making it positive, right? We don't see people living with HIV thriving. We don't hear the success stories. We don't have these type of conversations. And I think that that's so important too, about what you're consuming, because you talked about, you know, people pouring into you or the community, but I think it's so important that you find someone and resources that are going to pour into you in those moments. Because again, like you said, even when you first started working with children with HIV, even body language said something. So again, when people who are listening are trying to find healthcare providers or trying to find outlets, it's so important for, you know, like, I'd like to say, like, who's pouring into you, the glass that you're receiving that message from. Because again, some people might not know how to handle you know, people with HIV and like handle people who are living with HIV. And I think it's so important that you find providers and you find healthcare. Like you said, there's therapy for Black girls, there's therapy, but find someone who truly understands your plight, where you're at in your life. And that's at all capacities, not even just your status, but more so like who you are as a person. Like for me, when I went to therapy, I wanted my therapist to be a Black woman and she had to be fat. Listen, if you can't connect with me, because you're not going to understand if you've been skinny your whole life and you go to Orange Theory every day, you're not going to be able to understand my plight as a fat woman. Right. So, you know, it was important for me to find someone, you know, who's taking care of my well-being and my mental health to identify in the same way that I do. So minimally, if you're listening to this podcast and you want help and you're looking for someone who's going to facilitate your care and your status, make sure you know that the person is not ignorant, because let's be real, there's a lot more ignorant people than there are educated people. Yeah. So
and ask questions. Like I also have to tell like my clients or people who are looking for like therapists, like ask questions. Like, hey, what is your experience around working with
Interview them.
Interview them.
I tell people that all the time.
It's almost like dating. It's just like, hey, we got it, because I'm about to tell you all of my business.
My life. Okay.
So in order for you to know or have access, right? Because for me, I treat doing therapy with folks as a privilege, right? You are coming to me for 50 minutes and we are talking about some of the things you would probably never talk about with anybody else. Yep. And so in order for me to have access or to have that level of privilege and honor to be able to work with you, please interview these folks who you're working with. Like, please ask very thorough questions. Because you're right. Like, you can go to a perfect person and they might be Black and a woman and fat. And then you get there and then they start pushing diet culture, right? And that's not what you're looking for.
Right,
so,
right.
yeah.
Well, no, and that's what I tell people all the time, because a lot of times, like we said, with this, you know, resurgence and everybody starting to look for therapists, you know, a lot of my friends are like, I went to this lady and, you know, I didn't really like her. And I'm like, it's literally like a first date every time. And it's unfortunate because you get there, they ask you all these questions about your past, and it's like, you know, emotional off-putting, right? But it's like a date to me. Like, you go on a date, you invest that time, you sit there at the table, the person could be a complete ass, but at the end of the day, you went on the date to figure out if that's your soulmate, right? Yeah. So the same way with therapy, I kind of look at it like, yeah, you do for that whole hour kind of sit there, but it's important, because if you do find your match, it's going to change the trajectory of everything you do moving forward.
Yeah. And this is Shanéa. This is Shanéa talking. Okay. So you also don't have to find always your perfect match, right? Sometimes the date is sometimes like, this is okay for this week, right?
It's so it
might be casual. Like I might go in and I might not want to go in and talk about like my deep childhood trauma, because maybe I did that work somewhere else. Absolutely. Or maybe I have a group of people who support me around that. But here I might want to talk about being diagnosed. Here I might want to talk about coping skills. Here I might want to talk about my anxiety. Here I might just need you so I can have access to my medication through a psychiatrist, right? So, you know, we don't, everything doesn't have to be deep. Sometimes, you know, and this is also, you know, this is coming from a person who really also talks about like polyamory, like not everybody can meet all of your needs, right? So sometimes you pick, you know, this session that I'm having with you or this relationship is really for this one thing. So I also want to encourage people like, yes, we want people to have deep relationships with their therapist. That's great and fantastic, but not everybody needs that.
I've not always had that. So for a while it was me. You needed to be a Black woman so that you could get me. I needed to be safe. I needed a safe space. Black women have historically been a safe space in our community for particularly as a Black queer femme. Like, it's the women who be like, leave that baby alone. So, you know, you feel like, I felt like I need to be connected.
That's good.
And it halted me at a point, because I was like, I can't find no more Black women. And I remember the first time I had this like white guy who was from like, I want to say like Lancaster, PA. And he tried to connect like we were both from Philly. I was like, no, because that's Lancaster. Not to be confused. But was one of the most effective therapists I had, because he served another purpose. And I immediately just saw it when we were talking. I was like, you serve another purpose. There is something that you have to give to me that they did not have. This will be no woo-woo-woo here. This was like, so why do you keep doing it? So why you gonna stop? Because I know you know better. Like, I do know better. So I definitely can appreciate that. Right. Definitely can appreciate. I have a question for you. Because we talked about, and you when we talked about kind of like that having a person be empathetic, you hit on the like paraverbals, watching your body language. Love that you said it because I watched that in providers. And it also teaches you, it's more than what they're just saying. It's also teaching you what professionals think about you.
Yes.
If I trust you as a professional and your paraverbals is like jumping back, then I believe I'm untouchable.
Yeah.
This goes into the back of my mind. This goes into my subconscious, right?
Yeah.
How do you think that spills into disclosure? Because for me, admittedly, disclosure was a hard thing. It was a hard topic. I did not get this from the professionals. My community had to help me with that. How do you think that spills into, how do you think that affects disclosure, how we're handled, or like how we message to patients?
Sure. Shanéa will talk because I think something.
Okay.
I think I had an incident where I learned this, where I was with somebody that I was dating that told me that they were positive. Really, kind of along the lines that we were dating, and I think. At the time, I was not as educated as I was now. And so listening to them tell me, I kind of like blacked out a little bit. Like I was just like, whoa, what's happening? I don't understand. My mind goes all the way back to North Carolina and Magic Johnson. I was like, oh my God, like what's happening? And so then I had to like stop myself and then bring myself to. And then I remember getting up and hugging them. And I remember when I got up to hug him, he jumped. And I was like, dang. I was like, first of all, thank you for telling me. Like, I really appreciate you telling me. And I was just like, and now I'm realizing that one reason why you sat so far apart from me to tell me is because you thought I was going to get up and I was going to hit you.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind because I was just like, oh, shoot, like, I'm sure it was hard for you to have this conversation with me. And so you were already prepared to be met with violence. And that's what I hear from my clients. Like, they are always in some way, shape, or form be prepared to be met with violence.
Every time.
With cursing, with calling them names, with people telling them that they're dirty. Like, that is what I hear. And so when the part that I feel like plays into disclosure is that people don't. And they make a choice not to. I think as a clinician, I am all about body autonomy. I'm all about you making choices for yourself. So some people who choose not to, especially if you are undetectable, if that is something that you choose to do, that's fine. And if you want to have those conversations, if you feel like you're having a conversation and you're not too sure how it goes, like, make a safety plan, right? Like, we just never know how people are going to react. But also, I hope that you get to a point in a relationship with a person and you're having and you get to know them well enough to where if I do tell you, like, you're not going to hurt me, right? You're not going to call me these names. You know and understand why I didn't say anything, or that I'm saying something now, or that we're actually having this conversation with each other. So I think that even as an older adult and kind of going through the years and seeing people having to disclose, not only in intimate relationships, but with their doctor, right? So going from being HIV negative, HIV positive, like, it changes the way that doctors see you. It changes the way the treatment happens. It changes, it affects all the rest of the things that are happening in your body.
It does.
So it's just like, it now we have to get more care. We might need to take more medications. Like, some people just don't want to go through that. And if you are a person who is ill or chronically ill, like, I get that. I get that. I understand that. So I think that disclosure really is affected by, again, this whole societal aspect of how we think about people with HIV. But I really wish that in communities we had more sensitive, compassionate conversations about how to support people around disclosure when they want to. Like, I think that's important.
I absolutely agree. I think, admittedly, I was horrible with disclosure at first. I was not telling you. And so my first plan was like, I'm going to be super upfront and I'm going to let them know. Because it was a time and not even the segue, but when protection just meant condoms. So, we live in a time now where protection can mean, what does it mean to you? It's PrEP protection, you know?
Absolutely.
But at that time, we were just looking at condoms. And so I was like, I'm going to be very upfront. And it didn't go well. A lot of the times. I get why they were ready to, you sort of have to be ready to knuck if you buck if you're going to have that conversation with people. Because people, it sometimes will unlock their worst selves. And that is usually not personal. That is usually like community thing. That's what you learn in
having a reaction,
what we learn to feel about each other. What we learn now, all of a sudden, it doesn't matter who you are the worst of the worst. You're the worst of whatever your community believes about the gays and the queers. And so I get that. And that was why I was really, really horrible. And it was it was some eldership. Like I remember I had messed up and I didn't disclose in a situation. And then the person came to me and disclosed. And I was like, oh, me too. Positive, undetectable. And they were like, excuse me? I know you didn't do that. And I mean, Elder read me for Phil.
Yeah, we need them.
But they picked me up. I mean, they were like, come over. And I was like, is the hookup again? No, it's not the hookup. It's not right. And they had books ready for me. I mean, really like so ahead of the time. And was just like, listen, and said something to me that may not resonate with everyone, but changed everything for me. They were like, if a person rejects you in this space, then they don't deserve you.
Yeah.
That was powerful for me only because it meant, I shared with you all that, like, what that means to get the diagnosis and the whole monster and all of that, how that speaks to self-worth and worthiness and forgiveness, all those things. That was a reiteration of like, you rebuilt my self-esteem. That was no, you are still worthy. He didn't say all of that. That's what it was saying to me. And it was like, oh, I am. And I remember the first time. It happened at his house because somebody was hitting me up on Grindr way before Grindr had the little options. Grindr J now. You put it in. This is back in the day. Mind your business. Do not worry about how old I am.
You an OG Grindr?
Okay, y'all about business.
No, OG Grindr.
OG Grindr, okay.
OG hookup apps. The originals. And I remember telling somebody ahead of time, hey, this was in Coward County too, child, so One like DC. Because we talk about that in another episode, but where you are changes things.
Absolutely.
And I remember saying, like, just so you know, I'm undetectable, positive, take on medication, blah, blah. And the first time somebody was like, yeah, cool, that's fine. I was like, oh my God, she's back. She is back. Hide your husband. She is back. It changed the disclosure conversation for me, and it changed my confidence with it. And I don't know. It hasn't always been positive. Everybody has not like pulled out the roses, but I just didn't care after a while. I was like, I learned to, actually I was, working at low level, working as like a health worker in the HIV testing counselor. So I used to keep in the notes in my phone, a little like spiel that I had. If a person was like, oh no, I'm okay. I was like, okay, cool. But listen, if you need to get tested, this is a great place to like go. Because you should know your status and people won't tell you about it. And here's a statistic about where we live. 50% of the people here, like I wanted to have the conversation because if you're that scared, know that I'm the one that told you.
Yeah.
Most of these people are not going to have that conversation with you. So I appreciate you sharing that about this.
And maybe I have a question for you. So what I'm seeing is a shift in that mindset of being able to tell, like, or being able, like, for some people now, especially because now we have PEP and PrEP and people are undetectable. Like some people I'm now meeting people with the mindset of, I am living with a chronic health condition.
Correct.
And so and I'm taking medication, I'm managing it. There's no way that I can pass it to another person. I don't feel like I need to tell. Like, is that something that you are seeing with people who you're interacting
I'm seeing it
with?
and I think it's valid. I would like to stand that. I think that's valid. If undetectable is not transmittable, then how is it your business?
Yeah. Gotcha.
To the point, I think that's fair. I enjoy disclosure. I do. I enjoy disclosure because I need to see your response. So I can know if I want to have you playing in my face or not.
Because it means more, right?
It means more.
It's not just the interaction.
Right. I'm looking for the response to get into this, especially because with myself, I'm very openly positive. So if this is uncomfortable for you, you're going to be uncomfortable. Yeah. I've had partners, a lot of my relationships have been with people who are negative, like discordant relationships. But however, I've had relationships with people who are positive, who are like, love it for you. Great. I'm not comfortable with how much you share because it makes my friend ask me questions. Yeah. You should be with somebody else. So for me personally, that's why I want to, again, make it is a personal thing. It's about, just knowing who you are, knowing how you show up in the world and making decisions according to that. I also support people making decisions in accordance with their safety because it is not the same everywhere. And that's even in the DMV. Depending upon where you are, it can change drastically how safe it is for you to disclose. And we still live in a time where if you're in an area where people are not educated, people will spray you. People will see your news and they will make you the news feed. They will go on Facebook. So I would never tell anyone to disclose necessarily.
And I also want to add, in case people are listening and they're like, oh my goodness, like, I'm really concerned about like, people not telling or X, Y, and Z, like, but but for me, and then the encouragement I have is, then you can do something about that, right? Like that, it's having a conversation with your healthcare provider, making sure that you're getting texted regularly, making sure, and I, as a person who is assigned female at birth and also takes PrEP, like I tell people, like I tell them about my story around like, this is why I do it. This is why I protect myself, so there are choices for everybody around how you want to exist. So I don't want this to be a conversation where it's just like, oh, people just out here running rampant and not telling nobody. Yeah. It's just like, maybe, but also there's things that everybody individually can do in order to take care of yourself.
Absolutely, because it's your responsibility.
It's your responsibility.
Right?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you so much for coming on today.
That was it?
Yeah. The time flew. The clock went by, but we do want to ask, let everybody know where they can keep up with you, follow you, get in touch, or just, have a confidant in you, because you are giving... Let's talk. Let's chat, sis. Okay, yeah. So let everybody know where they can follow you if you do social media or your website.
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Dr._Shanéa, SHANEA. I am at University of Maryland School of Public Health and the Prevention Research Center. So if you Google us, I am there. I will pop up as their LGBTQ training specialist. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I don't know what else. Christian Mingle. Just playing. Shout out to T.S. Madison. But no, I don't have anything else. That's where you can Google me. I'm around. But this was great. I really appreciate having these like nuanced conversations, especially with Malachi. So
we appreciate you.
Thank you again for coming, Shanéa. Really, really appreciate you in the conversation. And for those that are listening at home or watching this podcast, please log into dcnshiv.org/podcast. You can find that right here in front of me. For those who are listening, you can find us at dcnshiv.org at your earliest convenience.
Yeah, absolutely. And make sure you use the hashtag Positive Voices. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you want us to talk about next. If you have a guest or if you want to share your story with us, we would love to, have you join Positive Voices. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Positive Voices is produced by Chris and Tiana. Our production team is led by C3 Creative Agency.